I'm Tom Witherow. I'm a news reporter for The Times.
What did we see at the weekend with these protests? Quite a few people were arrested, 522. What are they arrested on suspicion of?
Yeah, so at the start of July, Palestine Action was proscribed as a terror group, and that means that if you go out and show support for them in public, then you are opening yourself up to arrest. And those 500 people were arrested under Section 13 of the Terror Act 2000, which means that if you go out in public with an item of clothing or a sign where an officer can reasonably believe that you support that group, then you can be arrested.
So it's not being a member, it's not doing something on their behalf, it is just, I'm holding a sign saying I support insert name of prescribed terror group.
Yeah.
Gosh. And so what are some of these people facing? To be arrested on suspicion of this means what for them?
So they've been arrested. Most of the ones from Saturday have been bailed. But we've seen from protests that took place shortly after the prescription at the start of July that police have started charging people under that same section. Now, the maximum sentence, if it does go to trial and they're found guilty, would be up to 6 months in jail. So really serious offences, as you can imagine from something passed under terror legislation. The aim of these activists is to try and demonstrate that the law is in some way absurd. That's kind of the point of these actions. And so many of them, the organisers believe that they will not be convicted at the end of all this. That remains to be seen. We may talk about it later, but Palestine Action has an ongoing legal challenge to their prescription by the Home Secretary. But if you are found guilty of a terror offence, that's very serious. It hardly needs to be said.
Yeah.
And I imagine that the people who are out there sitting in Parliament Square will have thought long and hard as to whether they want that on their record, because it could have an effect on your ability to travel internationally. I imagine that you would be very unlikely to get an entry into the USA with a terror conviction. And who knows, it could affect your immigration status if there are people living in the UK with different types of statuses, and surely your ability to get a job as well.
What do we know about some of the 522 people who were arrested? Quite a varied bunch. I think there's even a Knight of the Realm in there, isn't there?
Well, I thought one of the most striking numbers was that supposedly half of them were over 60. But perhaps that comes back to the point we've just made. If you're struggling to get a job by going out and protesting, then you're more likely to go if you're retired. When there was a press conference before the protest took place, and one of the people speaking there was a consultant gynecologist. There was I think what we call a professional protester. She said she'd been arrested 100 times previously.
Gosh.
In one of the previous protesters, there was an 83-year-old ordained priest. There have been a teacher I've seen. Undoubtedly, one of the kind of themes of the people who are out there, and this will come back to the history of Palestine Action, is the environmental protests and Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain. A lot of the people who were protesting then are also back now with Palestine Action.
I see. And just finally on how these protests were policed at the weekend and how they have been in the past, such an enormous number of people to actually arrest. Were the police even able to do that? That seems quite a task.
Yeah, so the police had to switch up their tactics for this particular protest. As I said, this is probably the fourth or fifth of a similar type that we've had in the last few weeks. But the ones before, I think it started at about 25 people and then 50 and then 100, and now we're up well over 500. And the police were not really able to cope. There were people who were at the protest and left after the official end of the protest, which was an hour or two, unarrested. So they come and, according to the police, have done an arrestable offence but were able to walk off. Others were arrested and bailed on the spot because there weren't enough police cells to accommodate all 800 protesters, and police had complained that they weren't able to stop those people who'd just been arrested returning and sitting straight back down with the protest. So kind of farcical in one sense, and critics of this prescription have said, well, it should have been foreseeable that you're going to create a situation where the police wouldn't be able to cope. I think someone said to me the police have about 500 cells at their disposal in London at any one time. So it gives you an idea of what this type of mass civil disobedience can bring.
Just do the maths. We can't seem to move for mention of Palestine Action at the moment with their prescription and obviously these protests that we've seen, but they're not necessarily an invention of the last few months or even year or so. Where did the group come from?
So Palestine Action existed even before the latest phase of the Israeli-Palestine conflict that started with that terrible massacre on October the 7th. It was founded in 2020. And it was founded by a lady called Huda Amouri. She's in her early 30s. She was born in Bolton to a Palestinian father and an Iraqi mother. And I suppose her entry into this world of activism came through the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is, I think, relative to Palestine Action, a moderate, protest-driven group arguing for Palestinian statehood and so on. But over time, she felt that whole movement, which of course has continued for many years, if not decades, had not had the impact and was not actually having any effect on the ground in the Middle East. It's probably worth mentioning that Amouri's great-grandfather was involved in the 1936 uprising in Palestine against the British. And was killed by British soldiers. And she said they also destroyed her ancestral home. So, well beyond just her Palestinian roots, but also her, her family and her heritage.
So she saw a gap for a group like this that she wanted to see. How did she or others go about actually setting it up?
So I guess one of the key figures in terms of their tactics is that she joined forces with an experienced Extinction Rebellion activist called Richard Barnard. He, entirely different background, raised a Catholic, once belonged to a Christian anarchist group called the Catholic Worker, and today identifies as Muslim. He said that he picked up the idea of throwing red paint on buildings from his Christian activism. Of course, it was also a tactic that was used by Insulate Britain and some of the other environmental groups. The type of tactics that they use range from those environmental ones, going and sitting in front of a building and spraying it with paint. We see it at sort of Barclays Bank and Allianz insurers. And they choose those targets based on what they believe to be links to the Israeli state and its military machine, all the way up to some of the things we've seen in the news, which are the real criminal damage, smashing windows, breaking computers, taking all sorts of steps to try and shut down whatever business they're targeting.
Because their ask is what?
The original aim of Palestine Action was to target a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli weapons maker, supplies all sorts of items to the Israeli military. The UK hosts several sites of Elbit Systems UK, which is, as I said, a subsidiary, making parts for drones and all sorts of things. And that subsidiary supplies the UK military.
I see. And I can imagine, even though this group existed before October the 7th happens in 2023, and that really puts a wind up their cause as they see it. Is that when they really started to break through into the public consciousness?
Yeah, so they pretty much focused on targeting this one subsidiary of the Israeli weapons company up until October the 7th, but the boom, effectively, in their membership, people signing up to take part in actions after October the 7th, meant that they could expand what targets they chose. They went for much more direct action and in some cases more kind of extreme. They were able to kind of hype up their recruitment methods and then also hone tactics for the sort of new age of much greater scrutiny on what they're doing and much greater interest from the police. So find ways to make their work more secretive. They were getting people to use encrypted messaging apps. They designed a manual for people to use. They encouraged actionists to go into cells to try and make their communications more secure. So they were able to become a much more sophisticated group and make it more difficult for actions to be stopped before they happened.
And what kind of thing did they end up doing? I mean, obviously we have the famous example of them damaging that plane at RF Bryce Norton.
Yeah, I mean, the total number of actions between the start of the war and today is something like 400 or more. They are occupying military sites. They are taking sledgehammers to computers. They're standing on the roof with flares. In one case, they chucked a smoke bomb into a factory that still had some of its employees in there. So it's, they vary. Some of them are just 2 or 3 people, some of them many more. A key question now is, as we discuss the prescription and whether it's going to hold, is just how violent is this group? And whatever the answer to that is, there's no doubt that for people on these sites that many of these actions would be quite terrifying.